Hello quilters, welcome once again as we put a block together. Today we're going to put together the herringbone block, and here's an example of what that block looks like using our African fabrics. Notice that I chose one fabric to act as a background fabric so that all of the fabrics could really shine and not compete with one another. So let's get started. This particular block requires you to cut strips of fabric, and these strips of fabric need to be 2.5 inches by 5 inches. Once again, 2.5 inches by 5 inches. And if you choose to use one of your fabrics as a background fabric, you will need 16 of these little strips. I cut a few extra just in case. Then you will need 16 strips of the colorful fabrics that you will use to represent the herringbone part of the block. So altogether you need 32 strips for this particular block. And it may be that you won't need quite that many. I found that once I had finished the block, I trimmed it a little bit so that it was 12.5 inches in length. So we'll get to that when we get there. So cut your strips. Once again, the size for both sets of strips, 2.5 inches by 5 inches. And when you're cutting those strips, cut them from strips you've cut from your fabric that go across the fabric from selvage to selvage. That way they have just a tiny bit of stretch in them, which you will need for this project. Okay, I'm sorry, I need to back up. I said 16 of each. You need 18 of each, and I apologize for that. 18 of the fabric strips that you're going to use as a background fabric, 18 colorful strips that you will use to represent the herringbone part of your block. Now I want to talk a little bit about how this block is constructed. If you look at the example, you will see that it is constructed in columns. And each column here has 6 little strips in it. And I'm going to walk you through how we get them on the diagonal. But we're going to put together separate columns, and then once we get all of the columns sewn, we will sew the columns together. Notice also at the top of the block, one column starts with our colorful fabric. The next one starts with the background fabric. Then the colorful fabric again, the background fabric, the focus fabric, and the background fabric. And that is the pattern you want to remember when you begin to put your columns together. And I will say that each time as I get to the sewing machine. One other thing you want to remember, and I want you to pay close attention down here, because we want these strips to go into 2 different angles, we have to remember that they're going to sew just the opposite of each other. For those strips that have to angle to the right, this is how we will start to put them together. For those strips that have to angle to the left, this is how we will set them up to sew them together. Can you see? We have an L and a backwards L, so to speak. But this is something you really want to pay attention to in order to get your strips together so that you get the block that you want. And once again, when the strips have to angle to the right, we start sewing over here on the right. When the strips have to angle to the left, we start sewing over here on the left. Notice something else. If I want to start with putting this together, I started with the background fabric on top. And I did that in each case, no matter whether we were going for the left or the right. And in a minute, you will see how that works. Okay, we're going to the sewing machine. I'm going to start sewing these so that you can see how they go together. Now, when I get ready to sew these, I have to do two things first. This one would go to the left, but I want you to notice that I have to draw a little line on there to help me know that 45-degree angle from the tip of the fabric that's on the back. There's a little tip back there. That little corner, I want to sew from that corner down to the bottom corner here. And in order to help myself do that, I draw a line using my ruler and the 45-degree measurement on my ruler to get that there. You may be able to eyeball this. I'm not so good at that. So I have decided to draw a line. And you'll notice whether I'm sewing on the right side or the left side, I draw a line to keep myself where I need to be to sew this correctly. And then all I have to do is put a little pin in it to keep everything from shifting and sew on that line. So I'm going to put these aside and show you how I have started one of the columns. Notice right here, I have 1, 2, 3 strips already sewn, and I'm getting ready to sew another strip on. This is one of our focus fabric strips. And so notice that I have a line drawn. I don't know if you can see it very well or not. And I have it pinned so that I know exactly where to sew. Now, this is going toward the left. And I know that because everything is over here on the left. When I pinned it together, I pinned it just like this so that I would know I was going to the left. In order to sew it, however, we don't generally sew with the majority of our fabric to our right. So it's okay to turn it around, put it in a position that you normally sew, and then you're ready to sew it. And you stay on that line. Make sure that line works for you. Now, I'm going to fold it back a little bit, just finger press it for the time being. And I want you to see something. I'm glad this happened so I can tell you. I made a mistake. Can you see that I didn't sew to the point here? When that happens, that may happen to you, that's okay. Don't worry about it. What I'm going to do is take a little bit of this loose, reposition the piece of fabric back here, and stitch it once again. So bear with me as we get this out. You know that faithful seam ripper. There's not much we could do if we didn't have that. And so I need you to understand that that may very well happen to you. It's not the end of the world. Just pick a few threads out, go back a little bit of a distance, and then stitch it again. And this time, in order to really see that corner, I'm going to stitch it on this side so that I can see exactly where I need to go in order to get to that corner. So bear with me as I pull just a few of these stitches out. Okay. Now, I want to get to that corner right there. Right there. So I'm going to lay this down so that I can see the corner and I can more easily stitch directly onto that corner. That is so crucial. There we are. Much better. And then we just finger press it. And I'm not going to iron it yet because I like to iron the whole column at once. So now I'm ready to put another piece of the background fabric onto this column. So, and here we go. Since I know this is coming to the left, right sides together, and I'm going to start working over here on the left. That helps me to know exactly what I'm doing, and I don't get the directions of the pieces confused or mixed up. All right, and you can use whichever ruler you have that has a 45-degree angle on it. If you can see right here, there's my 45-degree angle, and I'm using this line running through the 45-degree angle. And I'm going to place that line on the side of the strip that I'm attaching and get my marking pen. And I tend to mark these right at the sewing machine. I don't mark all of them at once because I'm not sure which way they will have to turn. And I don't want to mark something for the left that eventually is needed on the right. So I have drawn my line, and I'm going to put a pin in the two pieces of fabric on the line. And prayerfully you can see that. See the line there? It's kind of hard to see because of this blue fabric. I think you can see that red line. And now I'm just going to turn it around. And stitch. Let's see, I want to make sure I'm going in. Oh, that would have been a big mistake, because I should have been going to the right. And you want to check all of these things to make sure you're going in the correct direction. So I'm moving this. I have to I have to line it up again. And you do want to make sure that everything in one column is going in the correct direction. You don't want it to flip around on you. If it does, get your seam ripper out, take out those few stitches, and make a correction. Okay, let's get this one stitched. As for the marking, sometimes I use the pen that you see now. I'm using that so that you're better able to see it. But when I know that something is marked on the wrong side, I don't worry too much about what kind of instrument I use. Most of the time, I just use a regular pencil. Okay. And here is our piece attached. And you can see that everything is going in the same direction. And remember, I told you that every column requires 6 strips. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this strip needs one more piece, and it's going to be the fashion fabric or the focus fabric. So here we go. Just lay it on here. And I may have to use a pencil with this because this is such a pretty red. I line it up using the 45-degree angle on my ruler. Because I want to make sure I get from one corner to another. And that 45-degree angle will get me exactly where I want to be. And then I'm ready to mark. And I'm using a pencil this time because I want it to show up. And I don't think that red on red would. And remember, whatever you mark it with, you're marking on the wrong side of the fabric, so it isn't going to be seen. And then I put a pin in it to make sure everything stays where it should stay while I'm stitching it. And so let's get this one sewn on, and this will be the last one for this column. Now, you can see that when we do this, we have a huge seam allowance back here. When this gets folded over, there is a huge seam allowance. I don't trim that until I have finished the column, and I'll tell you why. I just feel like if I've made a mistake anywhere, it's easier to take that loose and correct the mistake while all of that fabric is attached. Once I snip that off, then I've got some issues if I have to take this loose. The other thing too is when we are working on the diagonal like this, we are creating a bias. And if I have to take this loose with a big seam allowance out there, I'm less likely to stretch my fabric. If I've already trimmed this to 1/4 of an inch, there may be some stretching that goes on. So I leave all of those big seam allowances on until the end. And I'm going to show you one more column. This one is going toward the right, and I want to show you a column that's going to the left, and then we will press. And I started it here. Just want to make sure. Yep. And I need a piece of fashion fabric to go here. Here's our background fabric. And so I need a piece of fashion fabric to go. And let's see, I haven't used this one in a while. And it's nice to give yourselves choices when you do this. And you want to make sure you have right sides together when you lay them down. Caught myself about to make it go in the wrong direction. When you lay that down, you want to make sure that you have right sides together, and stitch it that way. Okay, let's get a pencil and get my ruler. And I honestly do take the time with each one of these to get the correct angle for stitching this. I don't think it's a waste of time, and I just think I make far fewer mistakes if I take the time to determine the angle that I need to stitch on. And I know that it's far better to put a graphite mark on the wrong side of the fabric than it is to have to sew it, take it loose, sew it, take it loose, sew it, take it loose. None of us want to do that. So let's get this one sewn on. Okay, now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I need to end this one with a piece of background fabric. Right sides together. That's going to be your mantra every time. So make sure you look at your fabrics carefully. Sometimes with our African fabrics, it's hard to tell the right side, but look carefully just to make sure so that you have put right sides together. If it's extremely difficult to determine, then don't worry so much about it, because if you can't see it, the people who observe your block won't be able to tell the difference either. Plus, the other side won't be visible, so they're going to look at it thinking you have put right sides together. Okay. And this will be our last one, and then we will be ready to press and to trim. And notice I turned that so that I can sew it in the correct direction. And I kind of peek to make sure I'm going toward that corner, because that's what's important. Okay. All right, now I'm going to press these. I'm going to press the seam allowances in one direction. And you'll remember from when you do piecing, how when you have different seam allowances that are going to come together, you press one seam allowance in one direction and press the other seam allowance in the opposite direction, so that when the two butt up, you have them nestling together and you don't get a lot of bulk that has to go under your needle. So that's what I'm going to be aware of as I press these. I'm going to turn around and get my iron going, and then press these. Then I'll show you how I trim them. Okay, here we are. We have our block all sewn. I'll get these strips out of the way. And this is what you want. You can see exactly how the fabrics go up and down. That's what is so unique about the herringbone block, is the fact that one row goes down to the right, one row goes down to the left, and you want to make sure that you don't have a fashion fabric opposite of another fashion fabric. You want them to be offset from each other, so that you have the background fabric right here beside a fashion fabric, and the fashion fabric can shine. And that's the case in each of these. I didn't worry about putting things together that were close to each other. I just put them in here. You may want to spread yours out and make sure that fabrics that are alike aren't close to each other. This is one of those design things that you can decide for yourself and make your block look exactly like you want it to look. Now that we're here, this block is longer than we need it to be. So the next thing I'm going to do is trim it. Remember, we're making 12.5-inch blocks. This is longer than 12.5 inches. But I found that when I used fewer strips, it was too short. So I had to add the little extra and then come back and trim it off. Now I'm just going to take a little bit off of the top just to even it up. That's all I want to do right now, is get this nice and straight. Just not all everything meets as it should at the top. Okay, now I need to take some off of the bottom, but now I can measure accurately to see how much I need to cut from the bottom. And you can see that the block is 16.5 inches long, and I need it up here at 12.5 inches. Now for our purposes, I'm going to cut it at 13 just in case, and so that you can really see the beauty of the block. I need to put a little bark there. Okay. And I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. And in your case, if you'd like, you could take some of it from the top and some of it from the bottom, whichever works best for you. In fact, I might do that now. I might just take some from the top and then some from the bottom until I get to that 12.5-inch size that I need. I want it to be balanced. Okay, let's see what I have now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I can still take a little bit from this end and a little bit from the other end. But essentially, you have finished the block. It's up to you to make it the size that you need it to be to fit into your quilt or your project. But I think this is a very simple way to make the herringbone quilt block. And while I'm talking about that, I did check out some websites, and here's our finished block at 12.5 inches tall and 12.5 inches wide. Okay, I did look at some other websites to look at how others were putting this block together, and I will share with you a couple of them. I went to Missouri Star Quilt with Jenny Doan, and I tried her method. And her method for putting this block together is to use half square triangles. And that's what these are. Here's one of the triangles. This is a half square triangle. Here's one here. And then you put them together in that way. If you would like to try this, just go to Missouri Star, Jenny Doan on YouTube. That's Missouri Star, Jenny Doan on YouTube. All of her tutorials will pop up, and just scroll down until you see Herringbone Quilt Block, and you can try her method. I still have a lot of little half squares on my sewing table from where I tried this the other day. Then I went to another website called Bijou Lovely, and at Bijou Lovely, I hope you can see this. This is what I got. They have a tutorial. I mean, they have a good explanation on their website. The one drawback from this, and they even tell you, is you have a significant amount of waste. This is about sewing these strips together at first, offsetting them, and then taking your ruler and whacking off what you don't need. And you whack off a lot. If I were you, I would check the website out, and then you can decide if you want to try that or not. And this is the website. I'm going to hold this up, put this here so you can see it. But it's Bijou Lovely, www.bijou, B-I-J-O-U, Lovely Designs, all one word, .com, /2011 /03 /herringbone block tutorial .html. And I'll just hold it for a minute if you would like to write that down. It's a very simple process, easy process, but it had, like I said, a little bit more waste than I wanted. I think I just don't want to waste any of my African fabrics. And if I were making this out of some other fabrics, I probably would have used their method because it is so simple. But I just couldn't do that with my African fabrics. They're too special and precious to me. So these are just two of the websites. There are probably many other ways on the website for constructing this block. I just chose the one I thought was the simplest and the one that did not produce a lot of waste. I hope this will help you in your attempts to make this block, and I look forward to seeing the results of what you've done. Thank you so much for joining me, and happy sewing.